I would say one of the biggest things on my to-do list is don't go to prison. It doesn't seem like a nice place, and once you're in there, your voice can be snubbed out real fast. This has happened again and again when prisoners are locked up and thrown away, never to be seen again. Why does this happen? That is exactly what we're getting into today. Hello, Most Amazing Top 10 family. I'm your host, Che Dorena, and welcome back to Most Amazing Top 10. Today we will be looking at people who were left behind bars for sinister reasons with this list of top 10 prisoners that were abandoned for creepy reasons. As always, I would love it if you could like, comment, subscribe, and hit the little notification bell, and stick around for the whole list because I'm going to be reading out and answering some questions from my Instagram inbox. If you want me to answer some of your questions, you can hit me up through the gram. Without taking any longer, let's get into this list. Coming in at number 10, we have Terry L. Nichols. Nichols is a terrifying individual. He is known as the Oklahoma City Bomber, and he is responsible for killing nearly 200 people. He suffered from extreme paranoia, and while he was in the military, his paranoia grew. He was convinced that the government was up to something sinister, and a lot of his mentality was fueled by his partner in crime, Timothy J. McVeigh. The two of them met in the military, and after being released from duty, it would seem that they convinced themselves that they should make an attack against the American people and the bodies that govern them. They constructed a bomb and set it in the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. This explosion killed over 160 people and injured many more. It didn't take long for the police to track them down, and the two were arrested. After a thorough interrogation and investigation of the crime scene, it was determined that McVeigh had planned out most of the attack and was sentenced to death. This didn't mean that Nichols was going to walk away scot-free. He was given 161 years in prison and left there to be abandoned forever. Coming in at number 9, we have Richard Lee McNair. To break out of jail once is pretty crazy, but to break out of jail 3 times, that's going to get you on the abandoned prisoner list. So between the years of 1988 and 2006, Richard McNair was able to slip out of prison 3 times. The first time he escaped, he was caught almost immediately, but the 2 other times he was able to spend a few years as a free man before they snagged him again. He's now locked down mostly in solitary confinement, so he should never be heard from again. Coming in at number 8, we have Steve Selvin. Not everyone who gets locked away and abandoned did something terrible. Steve Selvin was picked up for drunk driving. He was taken to jail and locked up and then moved to a prison while he was awaiting his trial. Some of the prisoners were concerned that he was suicidal, and so they moved Selvin into solitary confinement, and then they left him there for 2 years. He would occasionally be let out for his allotted hour a day where he was allowed to go outside, but this was only if the guards remembered to do it, which they would often forget about. He had a cavity while he was locked up which he had to remove on his own, and on top of all of this, he never had a trial. They locked him up with no trial. They just moved him in there and then they just left him there like he was some sort of animal that should be forgotten. He was released and then he took the state to court and he walked away with $15 million. The reason that he was abandoned was literally because he was just left behind in the prison system and no one wanted to deal with him. Coming at number 7, we have Juan Navarro. After 37 years in prison, Juan Navarro was 78 years old and finally released from prison. He was originally accused of killing his own mother, which at first glance sounds like something horrible. How on earth could someone do such a thing? But when you go back through the records, it would seem that he might have never committed the crime. Most of the records that were connected to the crime were destroyed when a riot happened several years into his sentence, and the few files that were available showed that he never stood trial. He was literally taken to prison, and because he had no family to speak for him or come for him, he was forgotten. He was kept in a prison in Peru that was infamous for having some of the most ruthless criminals in the country. On more than one occasion, people in the prison tried to murder him. To make his story even more heartbreaking, by the time he was released from prison, he was already showing signs of dementia. He might have had a daughter when he was locked up, but he couldn't remember. Coming at number 6, we have Alexander Timojeva. Alexander was working in Russia at a meat packing plant, and he was one of the head technicians, and because of his work he had to move to Kiev in the Ukraine for a year so he could work at another plant. On his return from Russia, he and his family were stopped and questioned. Alexander was taken away, and then his family was forced to leave him behind and return to their home. Upon their return, his wife Svetlana started to get phone calls demanding that they pay $20,000 for Alexander or he would be murdered. She refused to pay the money, and then they started making claims that they would come for her son next. Out of fear, Svetlana had to flee back to Kiev. 2 years later, she saw a YouTube video of Alexander admitting that he was a spy for the Ukraine Ukraine, but this was most likely a forced confession so they could justify imprisoning him for what would be a 14-year sentence. This all happened because of corruption and because the family didn't want to give in to corrupt demands. Coming in at number 5, we have Eddie Collins. He was someone who was placed into prison for 44 years for first-degree murder when he was only 17 years old. When you hear first-degree murder, you probably think that's someone who might have deserved to go to jail, but when you break down the story a little further, it was really a case of a horrible economic situation. Eddie had been living on the street since he was a kid and really doing whatever he could to try and survive. He was caught up in a bad life, but when you're that young and all you've known is poverty, then there really isn't a lot of options for you. Eddie went to pull off a drug deal one day and things got a little hairy. He pulled out a gun to defend himself and he shot the person dead. He was caught and locked up and actually made it to the other end of his 44-year sentence so he could walk away a free man. Coming in at number 4, we have Robert P. Hansen. This is the type of story that movies are made of. Robert P. Hansen was once one of the most respected people in American intelligence. He worked for the FBI, and for most of his 25-year career it seemed that he was always looking out for the best interests of the American people. That was until he slipped up. He was about to be someone who would be abandoned in prison forever when his whole life would come tumbling down in 2001. What was the reasoning behind this? Well, it looked like Robert had been secretly selling off American intel to the Russians for a huge portion of his career, and he wasn't doing this for some honorable reason either. He wasn't some guy who was secretly Russian and wanted to see Russia move into the top spot of the world stage. No, he did this for money. This guy was selling out his whole country for a few bucks. Well, more than a few bucks. It turns out he made somewhere around $1.4 million, which actually seems kind of cheap for secret government files. I mean, I think 2 Chainz wears more money around his neck. Well, now he's forgotten in jail forever. Coming in at number 3, we have Robert Stoudt. He might be one of the most violent inmates to come into the American prison system. He was originally locked up for manslaughter after he killed a bartender. From there it seemed that he never wanted to be let go from prison, as he would go on to kill a fellow inmate and then get transferred to another prison, and then he would kill a prison guard and get sentenced to life in prison, where he was sent to Alcatraz to be forgotten forever. Coming in at number 2, Pascal Payette. How many times do you need to break out of prison before they bury you in a hole and forget about you? Well, it seems like the number is 3. Pascal Payette is one of the most notorious prisoners in French history for this exact reason. He was able to sneak away from prison back to back to back. And when I say sneak away, I mean he had a crew of men flying in with a helicopter and airlift him out like he was in a James Bond movie. Well, that's what happened the first time. What happened the second time? Actually, the exact same thing. Okay, well, what happened the third time? Well, the same thing again. 3 helicopter escapes for one dude. This guy must be pretty important. Well, after the 3rd escape, he was caught again and locked up in a secret location where he probably will be abandoned for the rest of his days. Coming in at the number 1 spot, we have Ramy Youssef, one of the 7 people that were involved in the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. This was a massive explosion that ripped apart the base of the building and injured thousands of people. The bomb that was used weighed over 1,300 pounds. After the attack, the CIA went to work and were able to snag 6 of the 7 people involved in the attack, Ramy Youssef being one of them. After his sentencing, he was thrown away for 240 years, and I doubt we will ever hear from him again. Alright everyone, that has been our list, and as promised, I'm going to be reading some messages from my Instagram inbox. Daniel D. Cheesecake wrote in and asked, what's your favorite flavor of cheesecake? I don't know if it's still there, but when I was a kid there was this amazing Indian restaurant that was in like Maple Ridge or Pitt Meadows, British Columbia. It was called GM Restaurant, and the owner's wife would make all the cheesecakes. I ate a chocolate peanut butter cheesecake there that I still think about anytime anyone brings up cheesecake. Dallas Booth By wrote in and asked, what's your favorite Netflix series? I think I would have to go with Mike Tyson Mysteries or Kengan Asura. Mike Tyson Mysteries is one of the most bizarre comedies I've ever seen in my life. There isn't a lot that can match it, and Kengan Asura probably has the best fight scenes of any anime I have ever seen. And finally writing in, we have Kawika13, who wrote in and asked, you have such a positive energy about you, is keeping positive difficult for you? First of all, I want to say thank you. That is super nice of you to say. And the answer is no, I'm naturally a very positive person, but I do work on it. I think having a gratitude practice is very important. Practicing being grateful for little things, like when you go outside and the sun's out, or you see like a cute dog on the street. And if things don't go your way or don't go as planned, then think about the good that still came out of it. Like maybe I did a comedy show and I didn't have the best set, but I could still focus on what I learned from the performance. And maybe the people running the show were super nice and I got to meet really nice people. Alright everyone, that has been our list. Thank you all so much for tuning in. As always, I would love it if you could like, comment, subscribe, and hit the little notification bell. Until next time, I've been your host, Che Dorena, and try to stay out of prison. Like, you don't want to go to prison. Once once he was... The first time he escaped, he was... Once he was caught almost...
I think the first time.
Yeah. He would occasionally be he would occasionally be let out for his allotted hour of daylight. He would occasionally be let out for his allotted hour. He would